financial year for 2018. My goodness, already. And what we're going to look at is the end of year receipt process. What we're going to start with is just to highlight some of the differences between the standard receipting and the end of year receipting. And then Murray will take you through actually running the program to produce the set of receipts. So if we go into Word. So on our standard receipting, it looks fairly similar, where you've got the date field, you've got the address field, salutation, and the first difference comes into play at this point here, where you can see if I click on the text of the letter, it's showing me that that is basically a field. The text isn't, really there. It's just the result of the field. As we've showed in previous webinars, if you push Alt F9, we'll then show you that that is just a field that's got the path into where my letters are and the letter type, so be it either a doc or a docx. Okay. The receipt details down the bottom, if I click my button, okay, is set up primarily so that I can put a payment in and I can split it into multiple parts. So as such, I might then have info 2, info 3. In the case of somebody's made a donation, they've also given a gift for something else. I can then show each part of the donation on the receipt. Okay. The GST is then also calculated from that. So primarily the biggest difference is once you get past the top here, we've got our field for the receipt letter itself, and the fields for the receipting part are also different, because when we're doing end-of-year receipts, we're not talking about individual transactions. We're normally talking about transactions over a period of time. So if someone's given me from the 1st of July till the end of June, or if we're running a different financial year, it may be 1st of May till the end of April, etc., like that. So that's the period that we use to run the program to pull out the data that's necessary for the receipting. The people who do the pledge records, so the people who do the regular gifts, normally we would say, no, we don't need to receipt those people during the year, and that then allows us to do the end of year receipt, so we can show basically the cumulative total for that person's gift for the years. Because a person can donate to more than one thing during the year, the end of year receipt doesn't have the ability to pull in the letter like an individual, letter based on, that period of time. Because if I've got, 2 campaigns or 3 campaigns the person's given to, then which letter would this system choose? And that's where it becomes a little bit difficult. So if I look at the end of year receipt, and we'll see some of the differences as we go through from the fields there. So if I go back to thank you. So normally the end of year receipt is called, as a standard name, is just called thank end. So it's just the end of year thank you document. Be it a doc or a docx is totally up to your own setup. Okay. The difference being that in here, when I have the date, I can just put in a Windows date, the same as you can do. So there's not a field so much that comes out for the date that we're doing the receipting. The address 1 to 6 is still the same in the salutation. The difference from there, as you can see, if I'm clicking on the text here, it's only if I'm clicking on an actual field is it showing me that it's grey to show me that that is a field itself. So the text that goes in here is fairly static, but I can then use fields like the donation list here, the donation total. The people will get a receipt number, but it will be one receipt number for the whole period that we choose for those donations, be it the financial year or whatever it may be. We can also run the end of year receipt in the case of one person. Say if we had somebody who was a regular giver who for some reason was, say, moving overseas or whatever, and had asked for a receipt up to that period of time, you can run the program at any period of time, choose the date range that's relevant for that donor, and just enter the donor number so we can produce a receipt just for that one person. If I go across, in this case, I'm already on my mailings. So if I go across to preview results, you can see in this case here, it's got thank you for giving, according to giving. So here in this particular record, there's only one donation they've given during the year. Okay, so there may have been somebody who started. Obviously, in this case, fairly old record I'm using because it's 2011 is the date and the amount. So those fields come about from the donation list. Okay, So that we've got the don count, which will show how many donations or how many gifts the person has given in the period that we run the program for. The donation list will show me a list of all the donations for the period, and then we can have the donation total and the receipt number. So in your letters, whether you want to show, the donation list showing every single date and every single donation is totally up to you. Or you can just have it where you've got your letter, so you've got your nice bit of text in there, etc., as you go through. And instead of having each individual payment put through, especially if you've got, 12 payments or more, it can get a little bit messy because it basically goes down one side of the screen and it takes up a fair bit of room. So if I just said, look, I don't need to have that in there, I can just have my letter, so I'd have all my text that I wanted to have, thanking the person for their support during the year, etc. But when I preview the results, I could then include in the text of the letter the total that the person had given during the year and also the receipt number. The receipt itself, as you can see in this case, there's only necessary to have one line, so we can't have a split donation here. So the date that goes on here is called the last date. So it's basically the date of the last donation in the period that we run the end of year receipt program for. Okay. So normally if the the auto deductions are done in the middle of the month, this will be something like the 15th, 16th of the month of June. From there, we've still got the name line, but as opposed to the normal receipt, where down the bottom I've got info, info 2, and info 3. In this case, I've pretty much got a field that says don count, which is the same as the one that we're using up here. Okay. And then there's a field that at the end of it, so by default I can put donation, and that's just text. But where I've got the S at the end, that's something that can be automatically generated based on how many donations the person's given me. So if I take that off at the moment, and under my rules, I can use the if then else, and my field again would be don count. Okay, so if I said if it's equal to 1, put nothing in here, otherwise put S. Okay, so in this case you can see it hasn't changed the text here because for this person there is only one gift. If I wanted to check how that actually works or that it does work, I can click on Edit Recipients. That'll show me normally the list of all the people. Click down here my thank end text, which is my source for the end of year receipts. And if I click on Edit, you've got all the fields basically. So if we go through and say I've got donor number, so if I've got don count, and in this case if I said, look, they've given me 3 gifts during the year. So normally you don't have to do this, this will come out as part of the data that we use. If I go back down here now, okay, so it's basically then put the S on the end because the donation count field is now greater than 1. So that way I can have the text there, just put the field in, and that will change dynamically for each person, because you may have a person who is, has just joined your regular gift program, or someone who's been doing it for a little while, or for some reason they dropped out during the year. There might be someone who only does it, every 6 months. But in that case, the number of donations that they've given can certainly, be reflected here by the donations, and then the donation total will be the total that the person is giving you during the year. So where previously I had the list of the donations, that would show the dates and all of the donation amounts, and the total of that is normally what I'd use rather than having that whole field. If you do use the field for the donation list, what you can do, if I just go back here and I'll put this field back in my case, sadly, I didn't create a file that had more than one, but if I insert my merge field and I've got my donation list, what you can do at this point of the screen is if you go in, you can then change that so it's multiple columns. So just for this section of the document, you can have it so it doesn't take up so much of your real estate going down the page, that it can go across the page. So if the person's given quarterly, they'll basically have at least 3 records on one line and one on the last line, because it's not going to chew up as much of my document as I go through. Because as you can imagine, Monthly is bad enough because you'll have 12 donations in your list here. But if you've got somebody who might be doing, say, fortnightly or something like that, then the list is going to be absolutely huge. The decision then would be, do you need to create it so that page 1 basically was the text that you wanted to have and the main details for the counter donations, the total, etc., like that. And then after the receipt, you could have a secondary page that basically had the list of all the donations if that was what you desired to do. So not a lot different between the two, but you can't automatically open up your receipt and say, I want to use the end of year receipt file to do that, because the fields are totally different. If you wanted them to look the same, obviously you don't want to have a totally different thing. So if you've already got your receipt set up, it's got your letterhead on, it's got your footer and everything like that. If we were to go and modify our receipts, I'll just save that. So what I'd have to do first is select recipients, use existing list. So I'd have to go through, find where my Donman's running from. So in this case, I'll use Donman. Work. Okay. So you can see in here, in my DM work directory, I've got thank end, and then I've got thank end 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So pretty much like we do with the everyday receipts, and it's called, the data file is called names.txt. Each time you run the end of your receipt program, the system will back that up. So if we've run that, multiple times, I'll pretty much just overwrite the file. So if I choose thankend.txt and say, no, I don't want to save names, so you'll see straight away I start getting, error messages like this where it's saying, look, there's a field in the receipt called letter number that doesn't exist in the data file. So in this case, all I could do is remove that field. And if I go back to my preview results, each of those fields that doesn't match is going to come up and show me, okay, I've got something wrong here. So where I've got letter date, in the end of year receipt program, I could either use the last date to replace that. So if I say yes, and then note, so I can remove that because it's not going to be necessary. So again, receipt number. So it's really just a matter of saying, if I do want to change that, the fields aren't called exactly the same name, so they don't necessarily all line up. And receipt date, again, will be my last date. Okay, and then info is where I haven't got anything in. So instead of info here on the end of year receipt is where I've put the donation count field, and I put the donation with the rule, the conditional field at the end that said if the donation count's greater than 1, put that in. So what I could do at this point is say, look, remove that. For the donation field, I can replace that with the donation total. And then for info 2 and amount 2, info 3, amount 3, etc., I can just remove those. So you can see now it's put in the date of the last gift, in this case, the name of the company that was from, but I don't have anything in the particulars. So this is where I could do, just like I had on the previous document, I can put in Don count, put static text in, and then again put in my field that looked at that. So if we go back, say I'm looking for Don count. Okay, so you can do it like I did before, where it's equal to 1, it leaves it blank, or you can do greater than. So if I said greater than 1, so I want to put the S on the end, otherwise I don't want to put anything. So basically, if it's not greater than 1, then don't put anything there. So if I click OK, in this case again, because there's only one donation, that hasn't changed the document, and I've got the amount here. Okay, so you can sort of go through and do that, but at the moment, the thing that's totally wrong, I need to get rid of my text that's here because I've removed the letter number field, and if I try and merge that, I'll just get the error saying, obviously I can't find the letter. So from there, we could start writing our letter. Thanks you, I'm using a bit of bad English there. Okay, so from there, again, I can use my fields that are coming from here. So I can do donation total and donation count as part of my letter. So I can use those fields, have my text in there, So my receipt, when I do it either end of year or I do it as the daily receipt, is pretty much going to have the same look. It's just not going to have all the fields aren't going to be used because I can't have split donations and things like that in the case of end of year receipts. So hopefully that sort of highlighted some of the differences between the two. And if you haven't got an end of year receipt document, that you can use your standard one to make the change. You just have to marry up all the fields to make sure that it matches what's coming out of this. So the primary difference is, don't save this now. If I had done this, it would muck me up big time. So I then have to do File, Save As. So I could then just call that my thank end document. Override the other one that's there. Okay. So if you are going to do this, ideally open your receipt, and the first thing to do is save it to thankend.doc or docx. Then pick up the data file, save it again, and then make the changes for the field. So that way we're not going to muck up our everyday receipt, because as lots of you would have experienced in the past, if you sort of mess with that document too much or muck it up, it mucks it up big time, and it can be very frustrating. Yeah. So that's about the end of what I can show you for the differences between the two documents and how you can change from one to the other. It's just the fields are different, and there's not too much to it. As you saw, it took a couple of minutes to go through and change it. If you're not sure on the fields, you can always put the field into the document, do the preview results like I've got on here, and see what comes out. So it will actually show you the details of that as you go through. Okay, so I'll hand over to Murray now, and he'll show you actually running the end of year receipt program in Donman and the options that are available there.
Okay, thanks for that, Gary. As he mentioned, I'm going to go through showing you how to do it, but I'd just like to highlight a few points. Some of these points Gary has already mentioned, so it's obviously an important thing to do for some of those points. So obviously this normally gets run at the end of the year, end of your financial year, but there are times where you may wish to run it for one donor at some point. So typically this is used for your regular giving program. So you might have particular pledge campaigns that people give to every month. The reason that you wouldn't normally use it sort of across the board is that there may be a lot of donations throughout the year where maybe it was for anonymous, or they didn't want to receipt, or for whatever reason you chose not to receipt it at the time. If you're not careful, you'll end up picking up all of those one-off donations here and there and generating a receipt, which is kind of counterintuitive or counterproductive, because you didn't want to receipt those. So why now do it at the end of the year if you didn't want to do it then? So as Gary mentioned, if you're doing, say, an auto deduction campaign where they give regularly, typically you would say on that, don't receipt these, because this program will only pick up donations that do not have a receipt number. So if you accidentally receipt some of these donations through the year, but choose not to print them, or you might print them and go, oops, made a mistake, and throw them in the bin, this program will not actually pick those up. So it is important that as you go through the year, that if they want an end of year receipt, they can't have a receipt number allocated to them. That also becomes a little bit important for one of the later points as well. When you actually run this, you have a choice of running it for real or for testing. When you actually do the final run for real, it will actually allocate receipt numbers to all of those donations for a particular donor. So if I've been giving a donation every month and you've said don't receipt those, when you actually do it, it's going to assign the next available receipt number to all 12 of my donations. So that's great, but what it means is that once you've run it for real, it will not be able to pick up those donations because now they have a receipt number. So it is very important that you run as many test runs as possible until you are 100% certain that you've picked up all the right people, that you've got all the information that you need in your merge file so that you can do proper receipts for everything that you want. Hence my last option there, run as many tests as necessary. You only should print from your real run. When you do a test run, it will it will give receipt numbers in the merged data file so you can see what it's going to look like, but it hasn't permanently allocated those to the donors. So if the next receipt number at a particular point in time was, say, number 1001, if you run this and it picked up 100 people, it's going to assign receipt numbers 1001 through to 1100 in your test merge data. But if you then ran a batch of donations and receipted those, it would actually use 1001, 1002, etc., etc. So if you then tried to print from your test data, those were not the actual receipt numbers that would have been allocated to those people when you come to finally do a test run. I'm going to do a test run shortly, and you'll see that the first address field will actually show you that it's actually from a test run. So it's very difficult to accidentally print from a test run, but it can be done. If you've got different regular giving campaigns, you may wish to have different letters. So that text that comes after the salutation, you could run that for one campaign and put certain text there and produce the receipts. And then you could do the same thing for a different campaign or campaigns with slightly different letters. So if you do need to have slight differences between them, when you run this program, you would just simply choose which particular campaigns you want to run it for each time. As Gary mentioned, if, say, a donor cancels throughout the year, it's usually wise to give them their receipt straight away, especially if perhaps the donor has passed away and you get notification, then you want to be able to send that receipt to whoever's looking after that person's estate. Okay, so now let's go in and run the program. So the program can be found on your Modify History Archive menu. Now, if you're not sure how to get to that, from your Start menu, simply go to Main menu, and this is, let me go back home. So this is what would normally come up, and here, rather than saying Webinar System, it would have the name of your organization there. So we go into that, we then go to Fundraising, and we see a whole heap of options here. We're going to go into Modify History Archive menu. Now this, as most of you know, has a password. That password is danger, and that will then get you in. And this is the program that we're going to be running here, this end of year receipts. However, prior to that, I'd like to just show you the look of the data that I'm using. So I'm going to go into donor entry, and I've set up the first 5 or 6 of my donors to have some donations to a particular campaign. So if I bring up donor number 1 and I look at their history, you can see here in the financial year, the current financial year, I've got 1 from December last year and then 3 from this year. You'll see the receipt number in all these cases, all 4 of them, are 0, which means that at the time those donations were processed, they weren't actually assigned a receipt. Now, even if you assign a receipt and don't print it, it would still record the receipt number in here. So it is important that you make sure that you don't have receipt numbers for the ones that you want to include in the end of year receipts. Okay, so having had a look at that, what we're now going to do is we're going to do a test run. So when I go back in here, it's automatically brought me back into Modify History Archive menu, so I don't have to work my way through again. So I'm going to run this end of year receipts. So this is just a little information screen. I don't need to do anything on that. Okay, so up the top here, it's telling me basically what it's going to do. So you can have a quick read through that to make sure that you understand it. But essentially what we're talking about here is what we've already spoken about. The very first question says, do you want to do a test run first? Now, no matter how confident you are in your setup, always run a test run first, just in case something's changed and you now need to include a merge field that's not in your merge data file. Because as I mentioned before, when you do the test run and it produces the merge data file, once you've done that, there will be receipt numbers allocated to those donors, so you won't be able to go back in, run this again on that same group of people because it won't pick them up at all. So I'm going to do a test run first. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, normally you would do this for perhaps your regular giving campaign or campaigns, but you may have several that you want to pick particular ones for. Generally, you wouldn't do it just across the board because then you end up picking up all sorts of things. So I can say, yes, I want to do this. I'm going to do it for my grants campaign. What period of time do I want to run it for? Well, obviously I want to run that for my financial year, so that's 01, 07, 17. We do need to put an end date there. So you could, if you want, if you were running this after the end of the financial year, you can just put 30/06/18. If you're running it prior to the end of the financial year, then typically you won't have any donations after whatever date you run it. So you could just use T4 today's date. Now, if a single donor had cancelled partway through the year, this is where you can actually enter their donor number there, and instead of picking up all the donors that would meet the criteria, it's only going to look at that particular donor. Or if there was maybe a group of 3 or 4, you could actually create a selection file of those people and enter it here, and then it will only generate end-of-year receipts for those people in your selection file. If you're using barcoding, you can include that as part of the address. I'm not going to do that. If you've got second addresses for these people, you can use those as well, but again, not really necessary. I don't want to use the alternate salutation. So here's that file, thankend.txt. That's our standard file name. Gary mentioned that, and he showed you how he can attach the data source. That is the data source. So I'm just going to leave that as it is. Now that file already exists. So when I press enter on that, it says it already exists. Do I want to override it? The default is yes. I'm just going to press enter on that. And typically, once it's produced the data file, do you want to load Word and merge? Well, very much like when you do your receipts, you would typically say yes to this. So when I do that, I've got my document there. Once I've popped it in there, I don't have to use it again. It just remembers it from last time. So I'm going to use thankend.docx. And am I ready to begin? Yes, I am. Okay, so just like when you do your normal receipts, it gives you a list of the fields that it's currently outputting, and I can scroll that down. You can see all the basic information. For some reason, this has got comments, card number, and check drawer there. That's probably not really all that useful, but if there was something from the donor record that you wanted, you can pick it up from donors and pick the field in here, just like any of these other things that we've seen in various other places in the system. Once you've got the list of all the fields that you need, we simply click continue, and of course it remembers that from last time, so most of the time you will just click on continue. So it's found 6 of the 54,000 records on my file, and it's come up here. This is run today. It's picked up donations worth $2,080 from 6 donors. These are the receipt numbers that would be issued, but remember, these have not actually been assigned to these donors because I'm doing a test run. And the date range that I've chosen is here, and the campaigns that I've chosen was just grants. So I can simply hit escape on that to close that, and now opens up Word, and it brings up my document. So typically at the SQL command, I go, yes, I want to include the data from my DM work it's called thankend.txt, and it now brings up a sample, or the very first one. So if I just make that a bit smaller, might be a bit harder to read, but if I turn off preview results, you'll see very similar merge fields to what Gary had. So I've got address 1 through to address 6. I've got the salutation, I've got the count, the list, and when we have a look at this, you'll see rather than just having the one that Gary had, you'll see them all, the count, and then if I scroll down to the bottom, you'll see a receipt. Okay, so let me do the preview results again, and you can see that the very first of these address lines says, this is a test run only. So it is very difficult for you to print those off and then send them without noticing that you've actually only got that from a test run. So while it has nominated a receipt number down here, that number has not yet been allocated to these 4 donations. So what we're looking at here is that list of 4 donations as the merge field called Donat List. When I go down to the bottom, you can see it's got the date of the last donation, and then it says 4 donations and $850 total with the official receipt number, same one as we've got there. Now I can do a finish and merge at this stage, hit individual and go OK, and then I can actually go through and then look at each of these records, make sure that they look okay, and yep, so there's one that's only got the 2 there, and I might go, all right, there's 5, and then here's the last one. Okay, so having done that, you say, yep, I'm happy with that. You might want to print them off. If you've got letterhead, you might want to make sure that it all lines up on the letterhead, that it lines up for your envelopes. If you're 100% confident that that's okay, that you don't need any more merge fields, that everything is okay, that's when we would do a real run. But before I do that, let me close this down without saving. And I'll close the master document down. I haven't changed anything there. Let's actually now go back and have a look at those donations again. So we're going to look at donor number 1 again. And as you can see, there's still no receipt numbers because I ran this as a test run. Okay, now I'm going to go and run that again. This time I'm going to do it for real. Okay, so I'm going to say no. Oops, hitting 2 keys at once. Select by campaign, yes. It's got grants there. Everything's good. The same date, 01/07/17 through to, I'll just do it to T for today because I know there are no donations after today. I'm not doing it for a single donor or a selection file. So really, I just need to run through this again, say yes at the end. Nothing to change here. It's going to pick the same 6 people as before. Okay, same amount. The report looks exactly the same, except this time it's not a test run. And now I'll do my merging. So again, I would simply go into mailings, finish and merge, edit individual, and it has now actually produced this receipt, and this is what you would print and send to the actual donors themselves. Okay, so if we go back into the system, now when we check that donor, you can see that it's assigned the next available receipt number to that particular person, 29087, and when we go into Word and go back to the top, 29087. So having done that, if I tried to run that end of year receipt program again, it would not pick up anything at all. But what it would do is it would override your thankend.txt, and it would have basically a blank file. Now, thank goodness we do keep backups, so if you did accidentally do that, there would be a file thankend1.txt which would have all the real data. So what I've currently got in thankend.txt would be in that thankend1 if I tried to run that again. So it is a fairly straightforward process so long as you know which particular campaigns to do it for. And as I said before, you would typically only do this for particular campaigns where you know throughout the year that there are going to be more donations from that person, from that campaign or campaigns, and then you can do this end of year receipt for them. But again, stressing the important points, do as many test runs as you need to 100% confidence that you've got it right. During the year, prior to doing this, make sure that you don't assign receipt numbers to these donors. And then once you've decided that everything's okay, you do it as a non-test or a real run, and that's what you use for your actual data. That's what you print and send to the donors. So I'm going to conclude there and hand back to Marla if there are any questions that need to be answered.
Thanks, Murray. Well, we'll open it up to questions